We're going to continue talking about cover crops, but also maybe the management of cover crops and what's new and maybe some breeding for cover crops that fit our production system a bit better. So, Rob, what's some of the drawbacks that folks tell us that why they don't plant cover crops?
Yeah, we run a national survey for farmers on cover crops through my office. We've done that. We're doing the 7th national survey of cover crops this spring and just starting to analyze the results. And very consistently, the farmers not using them say the number one reason is they don't feel they have time to plant them in the fall. That's consistently the number one reason. There are other reasons. They may have concerns. They may be concerned about whether it's going to affect their ability to establish their corn and soybeans in the spring. There are concerns, obviously, about potential cost of paying for the seed. But the number one thing is the labor factor usually.
In the fall. Because if we plant the ones that we have now in November, we don't get a lot of growth. And we think, am I really doing any good? So we could either plant earlier, maybe overseed.
Yeah, we certainly see quite a few farmers getting the cover crops out there before the corn and soybean are harvested, especially in corn. We have a fairly wide window of 3 or 4 weeks that we can broadcast cover crop seed into corn, usually once the leaves start yellowing. Traditionally, when I say traditionally, like the last 15 years, we've seen people do that with airplanes. Mm-hmm. Others do it with helicopters. And more recently, there have been the use of high clearance sprayers modified to broadcast the cover crop seed into that standing crop. In the future, we may see small robotic devices running between the corn rows. There's been companies working on that type of equipment, or even drones flying on the seed, at least for ones that have lower volumes of seed to distribute, like radishes. So there's a variety of ways to get them on earlier, but one way is to have a variety of our corn or soybeans that comes off the field a little earlier. And so some farmers are doing that, not necessarily with all their fields, but maybe with a couple of their fields, they'll put an earlier maturing variety, and then they can start getting that cover crop on earlier. Now, in Missouri, we fortunately have a long fall, so that makes it a little easier to get the crop harvested and get that cover crop seeded.
But I've even noticed the cover crops that get planted the 1st of November in Missouri will come up. They're overwinter, and then in the spring they really come on like gangbusters.
Yeah, of course, rye is the best example of that.
Because, cereal rye.
Cereal rye could be planted later than anything else in terms of the annual cover crops, and as you said, can be planted in November. We occasionally will see farmers putting it out in December. Now, it's really not going to establish at that point, but if it even gets up just a half inch or an inch, it's providing some benefits. Even a small amount can make a big erosion difference. But just as importantly, that small looking cover crop may have roots that are 4 or 5, 6 inches deep in the fall, and those roots will continue to grow during the winter, at least when the ground's not frozen. So the living roots are really important to that soil biology, and that's why even a little bit of growth is a good thing.
And people may ask, why the living roots so what's so great about living roots versus dead roots? I thought microorganisms lived on dead material.
Well, there are fungi and other microbes that will feed on the roots as they're decaying, but we've learned that the living roots are exuding carbohydrates, certain sugars that a number of the microbes rely on to be able to grow and be active in the soil. And so Keith Burns, one of the farmers in Nebraska that's been a cover crop leader, formed a cover crop seed company called Green Cover Seed. He termed that the underground carbon economy. And I think that was a very apt description, that there's this trading going on, like on the Chicago Board of Trade, that they're trading back and forth. And in this case, the plants are trading the carbohydrates they can exude out the roots to the microbes in return for some nutrients and sometimes even water that fungi are providing back to the roots.
So if a plant's going to give up these carbon products that it took a lot of energy to make, it values what the microbes are going to furnish.
Oh, exactly. And again, our plants have evolved to have that system as well as the microbes. So our systems, whether they're prairies, forest, have evolved to have those living roots year round. And it's not something we really realized 10 or 20 years ago. When you and I took soils,
Right.
we didn't learn about that. We were focused on the physical and chemical aspects of the soil. But this new understanding of the biology is quite fascinating. It's leading us to change our management in ways that can lead to more productive, resilient soils.
I've even heard it said that when you feed a dairy cow, for example, a ruminant that has all these gut microbes, that you're really feeding the microbes which feed the dairy cow. And that soil could be thought of the same way. We got to feed the microbes, and that feeds the plant.
Yeah, sometimes I equate it to what we learned in grade school biology about the plankton in the ocean, that there's that whole food chain, that the plankton are eaten by the tiny shrimp and the tiny shrimp are eaten by
Right.
little fish, and then the bigger fish come in. But we can more easily visualize that because we can see the fish. We might even be able to see the shrimp, but in the soil, because these things are microscopic, it's kind of hard to visualize what's going on. But yet there is that whole food chain in the soil, and the roots are the starting point. They're like the plankton in the ocean. They're the starting point to that food chain.
Wow. And I've even heard that the plant can regulate what it sends out into the root zone based on what it needs from the microbes.
Yeah, we're starting to learn that there is what we could loosely call signaling between the plants and certain members of the microbial community. And as you said, that may trigger the plant to release more of these sugars or carbohydrates into the soil, knowing that, well, not knowing, but because there's going to be that exchange of nutrients back to the plant.
Wow. It's just so much to know, isn't there?
We're still learning, but what we have found out is fascinating and is giving us new insights into managing our soils.
It really is. And something got put together here at University of Missouri 80 years ago was a healthy soil, which we didn't call it soil health at the time, but the soil could affect the plant health, which could affect the animal and human health.
Yes, and that's a big overall goal under the leadership of our current dean, Chris Daubert, is to look at that whole set of connections, the healthy soil, healthy plants, healthy animals, healthy people, and even healthy communities, we might say. All these things fit together, and we want to keep working to better understand these systems and how to manage them to improve health throughout the system.
That's great. But now, talk about 80 years ago, when our fathers and grandfathers were farming and using cover crops, we're still using the same varieties for the most part.
Yeah.
Many of them.
One thing I've been pushing for years, and I know you've recognized the importance of this, is the need to breed new varieties of cover crops for the specific goals we have. Because if we look at some of the cereals we're using, whether it's cereal rye, triticale, oats, we're using things that were developed for grain production in that case. If we're using some of the clovers, they may have been developed for hay or other forage use. Radishes that we use as a popular cover crop were certainly not developed the varieties that we have for cover crop use. So, and if it's kind of like going out, we got two issues. One is that the farmers are just buying generically. So they're going to the seed dealer and they say, give me some cereal rye. And the seed dealer just looks around and finds what's convenient or low cost. And that's okay. It's better than not using any cover crop, but they may be getting a variety of cereal rye that's really suited for Florida or one that's better for North Dakota. And it's kind of like going to buy corn to plant and just saying, give me some corn and not asking for any particular variety. Maybe you'd get some corn that's great for Mexico or great for Canada, but not so great for Missouri. And that would really reduce the value of that plant in your system. So that's what we're recognizing with cover crops is we need to have varieties that perform well for the needs that we're targeting them for, such as weed control or soil compaction or building organic matter, and that they're suited to the region and the soil type we're using. So we've been fortunate to receive a $10 million grant from USDA that's starting this month at the University of Missouri, working with partners across the United States to breed new varieties of cover crops, do testing of them in comparison to existing commercial lines, and also to help develop new areas of seed production. So we'll be working with farmers to help them figure out which types of cover crops they can grow seed from in their area and add a new source of profit and diversity to their operations. So quite a few components to this project. We'll be looking at a variety of characteristics, not just how well they overwinter and how vigorous they are, but how much do the roots grow. There's been very little evaluation of cover crop varieties for that. Dr. Felix Fritchie at the university is going to lead that root work. We'll be looking at the forage quality of some of these new varieties if we're going to graze them as cover crops. So Dr. Ashley Conway is working with a team of our animal scientists to look at that aspect of it. So it's going to be a very exciting and important project.
Yeah, so we could get a cover crop that gives us all of those things, or if we really like I mentioned forages that we get that as the biggest benefit, or maybe if we're strictly a corn soybean farmer, one that has vigorous growth in November.
Yeah, we will want some that establish quickly, that can overwinter well. That winter hardiness is important with a lot of these, but it just kind of depends on the cover crop. If it's a legume, we may want one that gets more nitrogen fixation or fixes nitrogen earlier in the spring. We may want earlier or later flowering for various reasons. Pollinators are increasingly, you've been a great advocate of thinking about pollinator habitat. We're learning that cover crops can be an important source for pollinators because they flower earlier than many things tend to do in our farmland areas. And so lots of different reasons we need to be breeding better varieties.
Yeah, for example, crimson clover is utilized by the queen bees. It's loaded when it's blooming with these very large bumblebees, and the entomologists tell me that those are the queen bees. That's an important source of nectar and pollen for them.
Yeah, again, it's just we get flowering from some of these cover crops in April when there may not be many other sources of pollen and nectar for those pollinator insects. So important to help get that community of important insects more well established each year.
You mentioned vigorous root growth. I'm a big advocate of planting green. Let the cover crop do its thing. But one of the folks that works a lot with cover crops had said that annual ryegrass, which is different than cereal rye, by mid-March has most of its root growth done. I mean, it's 3 or 4 foot deep. So we could even breed that, like you mentioned, for root growth, that even though there's not a lot of biomass, there's a lot of good root growth. So if you want to plant your corn early, like a lot of farmers like to plant corn early, that we still get a lot of those underground benefits.
Yeah, I was talking earlier this week with some of our undergraduate soil students in one of their classes about cover crops, and I mentioned the story of Dan DeSutter, a farmer I know well from Indiana, been on his farm a few times. And Dan said he got started with cover crops. Someone encouraged him to try them. He was kind of skeptical, wasn't so sure they were worth it. First time he grew them, he used some annual ryegrass, which has been pretty popular in Indiana. And he said, well, it's only a few inches tall. I mean, he felt like, what good is it doing? Because it wasn't very big. But he had to repair a tile line in one of his fields in the middle of the winter. And he was digging down with a backhoe, and there were roots about 4 feet deep down to the tile line from that cereal rye that was only 3 or 4 inches tall above ground. And so annual ryegrass is remarkable with its rooting. Now, the flip side is some of our weed scientists are concerned about our ability to control it through termination approaches. There are effective ways to control it, but it is a little more challenging than some of the other cover crops. But regardless, the root growth of cover crops is something we don't understand nearly as well as we'd like to, and that's why it'll be a part of this new $10 million project.
Oh, definitely. And speaking of roots, we have some great success stories with some of the cover crops. You mentioned radish.
Yes, radishes are one of those things that is not an old cover crop. They were being used a little bit in South America, and a couple people in the United States learned about it, particularly Ray Weil, a soils professor at University of Maryland, working with a farmer named Steve Groff in Pennsylvania, and they decided to try it and found it worked very well in the Eastern Corn Belt. And from there, it just took off and has become one of our most popular cover crops across many regions of the United States. And it's because of their impressive rooting and fast growth in the fall. The radishes not only have a large tuber that can get up to a foot or more long, but they have a taproot that can go down as much as 3 feet in the fall. And it's effective at sequestering nutrients that are left over. Let's say we have a dry fall like we did in Missouri last year. And typically in that situation, you're going to have some nitrogen fertilizer that's still sitting there, but it could be lost if you don't have a cover crop by leaching or volatilization in the atmosphere. And so the radishes help sequester that nutrient profile for a time. Now, we're still learning about when various cover crops release nutrients to the following crop, but it's advantageous to have cover crops to help hold those nutrients in place.
And that goes into your having more diversity. If you had a cereal crop with the radish, it could take up those nutrients if they get released.
Yeah, the radish is going to start to break down over the winter, and so the overwintering cereal can be a plus because it'll grab hold of any nutrients the radishes in turn releasing and help hold it until the next summer.
I've even seen data that shows that when you have a cover crop, you actually have higher potassium and phosphorus levels in your upper soil because it's bringing it from down deep.
Yeah, there's a couple things that seem to be happening. One is that impact on the mycorrhizal fungi. They play a big role with phosphorus availability. So they are helping make the phosphorus more bioavailable, but also helping move it around. Earthworm activity is redistributing nutrients to some extent. And then, as you said, just the cover crop roots themselves, a loose analogy would be that they're kind of mining potentially deeper nutrients and redistributing them in the soil profile. So there's lots of factors that can make those nutrients more available in a cover cropping system.
Wow. So our radishes are a great example, but there's been some other breeding of like crimson clover, for example, but it seems like it's coming out of the South. Auburn's doing a great job.
Well, we have quite a few universities that are working on cover crop breeding just in the last 4 or 5 years. And therein lies the challenge. It takes potentially 8 to 10 years to get a new variety in the market. So this new project we have for $10 million, it's going to take some time to pay dividends. The good news is the folks that have been doing breeding are getting to the point where they're starting to have some initial releases. So there'll be a new hairy vetch variety released this year that will then go into larger seed production. So maybe a little bit of commercial availability next year. But yes, you're right. We'll get some new varieties over time from a number of locations, and that will be very helpful for the cover crop movement overall.
But we'll see some that are adapted to the South, the Midwest, the upper Midwest, not just a general one.
Yeah, and that's why we'll be doing a national cover crop variety testing program. So people, whether they're farmers or farm advisors, will be able to look at that and see, for my area, like Missouri, which ones are performing best. And we think that'll be very helpful, that variety testing.
Yeah, I think you've also mentioned like blooming earlier could be something that we might look into also.
Yeah, if you were really concerned for your system about pollinators, let's say you were putting cover crops in a fruit orchard or you had a vegetable system, you might want something that has a longer period of spring bloom to help with pollinators. On the other hand, if you're mainly focused on biomass, a later flowering variety will be better because they tend to put on more vegetative growth in the spring with the later flowering. So it just depends on the goals with the cover crop.
And then having Felix's data to go along with this, that might show you still get the same root growth. Possibly.
Potentially. That's what we want to study.
Right.
We're also going to do, he's got some interesting capability to look at multiple species of cover crops together. How do the roots interact? If you have cereal rye with a legume and a brassica cover crop, does that lead to a different type of root growth than if you have cereal rye alone? We don't really know. We can't tell by looking above ground. So we're going to be able to study that, which I'm excited about.
Oh my goodness. This is like where we were 75 years ago on some of the basic principles that we have now in soil fertility and crop production, that we're just scratched the surface.
Exactly. We have a lot more to learn.
Right. And like Ashley Conway's lead on the livestock, we may find dual purpose ones that are great forages, but also get good root growth too.
Yeah, and here again, we're also going to look at mixes with grazing. There hasn't been we know it's like us going to a salad bar, right? We're better off if we eat kind of a variety of things from the salad bar. So we kind of intuitively know for the cattle, it's better to have multiple species, but we really don't know what mix of species are the best for their nutrition. And when you put that together with soil health, which ones combined with the grazing value and the soil health, it's just tough to study that. So, but we're going to take a crack at it, and we're going to be working in 3 different states to look at how grazing systems with both single species and mixes work, and then what that's doing to soil health.
Well, this is so exciting, and this is going to really help the farmer, and maybe even financially even more when some of these new varieties could be actually produced here in Missouri.
Yes, I think there'll be a lot of opportunity for farmers to grow seed. Right now, we have about 20 million acres of cover crops nationally. That's taking roughly 500,000 acres of seed production to supply that. If we go to 40 million, and I believe we will in the next 8 to 10 years, that's going to take a total of 1 million acres of cover crop seed production. Now, much of that seed production currently is for the legumes and brassicas in the Pacific Northwest, particularly the Willamette Valley of Oregon. That's an area with a lot of high-value crops where the land is in short supply. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to need other areas of seed production. We're already seeing it with cereal rye and some of the other cereal cover crops that they're being grown throughout the Midwest. And I've had farmers tell me that in some years their most profitable crop has been cereal rye because it's low cost to grow. And even though it's not as high yielding as corn, it is a valuable crop in terms of a profit standpoint.
And they were probably building their soil health at the same time.
They are.
So like hairy vetch, for example, or crimson clover, that's something that you could even double crop. You could grow it for seed and still come back with another crop afterwards.
Yeah, crimson clover comes off pretty early. You can be harvesting that in maybe the second week of June, and depends on the variety. And hairy vetch is just a little bit behind that. There's some interesting thoughts about doing the vetch with certain cereals because that helps make the vetch easier to harvest. It holds it up off the ground. And there are seed separation techniques that you could potentially use to separate the seed for certain cereals from the vetch. So we're kind of looking at that as well to make these systems profitable. A challenge with new varieties is to make sure they produce enough seed to be profitable to grow. You could have a variety that looked terrific from a biomass standpoint, but had very low seed yield.
Oh, sure.
You probably wouldn't put that out into the seed trade because the cost of the seed would be expensive if it was low yielding.
And these will be not hybrids, but these will probably be like kind of like soybeans are.
For the most part, the things that we're expecting to be released will be open pollinated material. There is some interest in hybrid cereal rye, particularly coming out of Europe, and partly that is for the seed production market because the hybrid types of cereal rye are higher in seed yield. But when you have a hybrid system, you also have more cost in producing that seed just because of the nature of having to produce the hybrid. So I expect most of what we'll see in the near term will continue to be open pollinated material.
All right. Well, we can find more information about this and on the University of Missouri Center of Regenerative Agriculture website.
Yes, that's a great place to keep up with what's going on.
And you've got several folks working for you that are communicators and educators.
We do, and we're hiring more people now. We'll, by this summer, have a staff of about 12 people working on some of these different programs. And,
oh, my goodness. So if people need questions, they can contact your staff members.
Exactly.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Rob.
Thanks for having me.
And this is it for Tim's Take on a very exciting project on cover crops and breeding and we just scratched the surface on this. We'll see you. Bye.